It's episode 24 of the Exit Philosophy podcast, and we welcome you if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, and remind you that you can watch us at youtube.com/exitphilosophy, and if you're watching us at youtube.com/exitphilosophy, you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. We are everywhere all at once. He is Rich Griffin. Call him Griff. I'm Scott MacArthur. Call me Scotty Mac. And Griff, I feel like we've been dealing with this for a couple of weeks now, staggered out. I really shout out to the Toronto Blue Jays for the way that they staggered the appearances of their front office members in the aftermath of the playoff series with the Minnesota Twins. It's given us a lot to chew on, and this is our first appearance as we sit here on Monday, October the 16th, around lunchtime, both in Halifax and in Toronto. It's our first opportunity to break down Mark Shapiro, the team president and CEO's press conference from last Thursday.
Well, I think the spacing it out has been perfect for the Blue Jays, but the content hasn't been that perfect, and we'll go over that. But John Schneider addressed media, obviously, after the Game 2 loss, and then that gave Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro time to chew on what he said and the fan reaction on social media. And then Ross went on, and Mark Shapiro scheduled himself maybe 5 days later, knowing that he would have to do a few what Ross meant to say is. And that's exactly what happened. They spaced it out, giving the original mea culpa, then the Ua culpa, and then what they meant to say. So it was perfect for the Jays.
Then the Wea culpa? We had the mea culpa, the Ua culpa,
Yeah.
the Wea
And
culpa.
the Wea culpa, yeah.
And then by the time it was all over, it was unclear whether there had been any culpa. There might not have even been an umpire named culpa. There might be no culpas anywhere. There are no culpas to be had, Griff.
There's no culpability. But
I think you just taught me something. Maybe the word culpability comes from the whole Latin culpa thing.
Oh, everything comes from Latin. Oh, definitely. But they also now are busy with the renovations to the stadium, and they got a head start on that, being knocked out in 2 games and not having to play any games at home. So it should be ready for opening day for all you high rollers who want to be in the private club and show up in the 3rd inning in your seats.
So where do you want to start?
Let's start with the press conference.
Can I start with giving some credit where it's due? Because I want to be fair here, Griff, and I feel like I've developed a reputation for just being the curmudgeon-y, middle-aged, ponytail-wearing, moving out of Toronto, angry guy who just won't give this front office any credit, and I don't want to be that person. There's going to be more of that in the, few minutes that follow, but I do want to give credit where credit is due. Mark Shapiro sat up there and in his opening statements before a question was even asked, and whether he was saying it just to say it or whether he was saying it because he believed it, he said, "The buck stops with me." So he took ownership. We now have the individual, Griff, even though, and we'll get into this, he went on and on about not assigning blame, and I started to wonder if anybody was actually going to be held responsible for anything. But off the top, he said, look, this is my team. I'm the president and CEO. When things don't go right, the buck stops with me. So I will give them credit and him credit for coming out of the gate and giving us somebody to direct our questions to.
Let me just react to that. The buck stops here was very important for Mark Shapiro because nobody in that front office, and this goes back to Pat Gillick and Paul Beeson, nobody in that office wants the buck to stop at Rogers headquarters. Nobody wants it to go as high as Edward Rogers. They would rather, because if it goes to Rogers, they're going to talk about corporate blah, 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 profit loss. We can't spend that much money. And so Mark Shapiro takes full responsibility. The buck stops with him. Now it's up to him to go into Rogers, whatever they call it, campus, whatever it is, and convince them that he needs to maintain the club payroll at where it is and that they will do better next year. But if it goes higher than Mark Shapiro, then they're in trouble.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will give Mark Shapiro another dose of credit. There's nobody to date not to date, but there's nobody prior to him who was able to get Rogers to spend the money on player payroll and other ancillaries that are very important, Griff, whether it's the player development complex, which is, one of the talks of baseball down in Florida, whether it's the renovations to the Rogers Center, and the first half of those were completed last year, and that's to the benefit of the proletariat. And now they're going to roll out the second half of the renovation, which is to the absolute benefit of the bourgeois and is going to exclude, essentially, the proletariat. You go get drunk way out in left field and bring your binoculars because hoity-toity McGee is going to be sitting behind home plate where Nona used to be. And so that's where that is. But he has gotten the company that owns this team to invest in it. And I was thinking to myself, like JP Ricciardi would have cut off an arm to have a player payroll budget like what Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins have. Alex Anthopoulos, I was around in that era, Griff. They were walking around asking people like Jose Bautista to shave off a bit of now money into deferrals so that they could simply sign a guy like Irvin Santana. Irvin Santana. We're not talking about like Roger Clemens in his prime. Irvin Santana. That's how it was less than a decade ago. And in fact, Alex Anthopoulos withheld X amount of dollars in 2015 in order to be able to do work at the 2015 trade deadline, and then got really creative as well, dumping Jose Reyes onto the Colorado Rockies. And Reyes at that time was making more annually with less term left on his contract than Troy Tulowitzki, who the Blue Jays got back in that mega deal, was making at the time. So he had to be shrewd, both in terms of the money that he held back and in the way that dollar went out so that some dollar could come in. Mark Shapiro deserves credit for getting Rogers to go over the luxury tax. But you also have a responsibility when you have those funds available to spend them properly. And presuming those funds are going to remain available, the Toronto Blue Jays have to get this right, because maxing out at 92 wins, which was their 2022 total, maxing out at 92 wins in 8 seasons on the job isn't good enough.
To pile more credit on Mark Shapiro and why it's important and why it's important, his history in baseball. I think back to the Expos, my experience growing up in the game, and the presence of John McHale. John McHale was club president, then became GM and club president again. He was highly respected around Major League Baseball. He was a baseball lifer. And a little ball club in Montreal had a baseball lifer, highly respected around Major League Baseball. And that carried a lot of weight at the important meetings among the baseball ownerships, that John McHale was speaking on behalf of this little ball club in Montreal. And Mark Shapiro is a baseball lifer, as John McHale was. So when he goes to meetings, he's on committees. When he goes to meetings, he's highly respected. When he goes into Rogers headquarters, he's highly respected. He knows the game. He knows what's needed. He knows that the payroll needs to go up, and he's convincing. He's a great speaker. He's a great communicator. When he built that PDC or was in charge of the player development complex, and now the outfield renovations, the home plate renovations, and I'm more of a fan of the outfield renovations, as you well know. And so I think his importance can't be overrated. I think that the club, he has showed up at the right time, but to your point of there needs to be more accountability of the club they put on the field, I think you're right. I mean, with the money that they put on the field, with the club they put on the field for the money they had, maybe fans could have expected a better result. Not maybe, they could have expected a better result. I mean, there are GMs, Ross Atkins, we'll talk about Ross Atkins later, but there are GMs that can put together winning teams on a small budget. Dan Duquette did it in Montreal. Dave Dombrowski did it in Montreal. Dan Duquette went to a big budget team in Boston and was able to do it. Kevin Malone went from small market in Montreal to LA and couldn't do it. So it doesn't translate. So we're not sure what Ross Atkins could do with a small budget, but we know he can't produce a winner on a big budget. But the constant that was necessary during this period of Blue Jays baseball was Mark Shapiro. We don't approve of everything he says, everything he does, who he is necessarily, but that is not a bad presence for that ball club to have, for Rogers to have.
I will say he's a smooth operator because Griff, there are a lot of, and this is not a criticism. Okay. It's not a compliment either, but it's not a criticism of Mark Shapiro. It's just this guy knows how to play the game.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So he's up there and he takes accountability off the top and then proceeds down a variety of roads based on the questions he was asked that really just leave you almost psychologically, if you don't recognize it, because I thought about it after and I went back and I listened to the whole press conference again a day later. I'd slept on it and everything. And I'm like, man, you come away from 30, 40 minutes with Mark Shapiro not wanting to criticize everything. You come away being like, yeah, maybe a week to 10 days. Maybe it's just time to move on and let's get going on about next year and let's be excited again and let's love this team and maybe there's something wrong with me for suggesting that after the better part of a decade the results should be better, especially when you hear how these guys talked either into a microphone or to people when microphones weren't around shortly after they arrived. I don't want to get into all that. Yeah, let's go on. Here comes year 9. It's going to be good. It's going to be wonderful. Couple of examples of it. He was asked about the Gurriel Moreno Varsho trade, and his response, Griff, is inarguably correct. And I'll paraphrase and say it was something to do with it takes 5 years to judge a trade. And that is maybe not 100% of the time true, but it is true a good percent of the time, a very strong percent of the time. So you can't quibble with what he said, but also as he sits up there, he's left himself an exit door at the back of the room that nobody else can see. I can't talk about this right now. How could I possibly talk about this right now? Dalton Varsho's still young. Things could change. Gabby Moreno's playing great for the Arizona Diamondbacks through this playoff run. Yeah, it's all good. But I can't sit here in totality and know whether this trade worked or didn't for at least a half decade. And that's, I guess, a fair comment. But also we know that in the world of sports, front offices typically don't get that long.
Yeah, and he was clearly prepared for that question. I mean, it was an obvious question that he was going to have to handle. And as you pointed out, he left himself an exit, dignified exit from that one. I mean, you just think of Steve Pearson going to, or Steve Pierce, Pearson? Pierce.
Steve Pierce. Yeah.
Going to the Red Sox for Santiago Espinal. And after Pierce won the World Series MVP for the Red Sox that very same year, everybody's going, what a steal that was. Now you look at Santiago Espinal is still contributing to the Blue Jays, and Pierce retired after that one season, or he was nowhere to be seen after that one season. So you can point at that, and you can point at trades that were made in 2015, which at the time looked lopsided, to that the Jays were giving up too much, that Alex Anthopoulos was giving up too much inventory for a chance to win. And in hindsight, the deals were pretty good for the Blue Jays in that it began a new era for the team. 2015, 2016, a whole generation of younger Blue Jay fans were able to invest their emotions into this team moving forward, and it carried over through the 9 years. But the 9 years of Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, as you point out, and as you're about to continue with, there needs to be more return than just 92, 91, and 89 wins and a 1-10 record since beating the Texas Rangers in the division series in 2016. Since then, the Rangers are 6-0 and the Jays are 1-10 in the postseason, and that carries through the 3 wild card losses that they've had under Shapiro and Atkins.
Right. And I think without even intending to, Griff, you tweaked me onto something with what you said there, is that Mark Shapiro very much did judge Alex Anthopoulos's trades in 2015 well inside a 5-year window, well inside a 5-month window, well inside a 5-week window. And unless you want 2 years of a very average Matt Boyd in Detroit, or Jeff Hoffman breaking through as a reliever 8 years later with the Philadelphia Phillies, in exchange for those moves in 2015, you would have to say that some conclusions were too quickly drawn. But that's an aside, because I'm just over the whole Shapiro Atkins versus Anthopoulos thing.
Right, but let me just add one more point on the Arizona Diamondbacks deal. Is we know that Lourdes Gurriel is going to be a free agent at the end of the season. That the Diamondbacks are deep in outfielders, in young outfielders, and likely the cost of re-signing Gurriel and the fact that they are loaded at that position means that he won't be back with the Diamondbacks. And that leaves them with a catcher that at the time the Jays thought they had 2 young catchers that could do the job, Danny Jansen and Alejandro Kirk. And the Diamondbacks didn't want Kirk. They wanted Gabby Moreno, and they got him. So if Lourdes Gurriel leaves and Kirk is the only one, if Varsho becomes a center fielder in the absence of Kiermaier and figures out how to hit the high fastball, and what if they make a run at Lourdes Gurriel as a free agent? Could Mark Shapiro have been talking with that in mind?
Anything is possible.
Anything is possible, but we do know the buck stops there.
I'm trying to think how closely Lourdes Gurriel sounds to Cody Bellinger, but
we know that
in the event Cody Bellinger becomes a free agent, and there is some contractual stuff with the Cubs, he's becoming a free agent. There's no way he's hanging around in Chicago for $12.5 million for 1 more year.
No, I would prefer definitely the Bellinger option over the Lourdes Gurriel option.
Correct. The whole thing about being left-handed.
But he's not going back to Arizona, though.
Gurriel, correct. Yeah.
So does that change the view, especially if the Diamondbacks are eliminated in this round and don't go to the World Series? Does that change the view after Gurriel goes somewhere else of the trade? I would say no.
Well, again,
people have already made up their minds.
Here's no,
and it wasn't a good deal.
Here's the thing with Dalton Varsho, Griff. He's still young. There's been no indication that he is going to be more than what he is offensively, but there are still a number of years of control remaining. And if, as you say, he can figure out how to hit the high fastball, if he can bump that OBP up into a reasonable range, if you can start getting on base 32.5 to 33% of the time, that would be an uptick. Then it becomes more palatable. But right, you did not trade a future catcher. Goodness gracious. I mean, people were going down to Buffalo to write about Gabby Moreno and how his bat was major league ready. And the only reason he was down there was that he was still refining his skills, calling games and blocking and everything behind the plate. His bat was ready for a year and a half, we were told. So
here's two misjudgments on the part of the Blue Jays that show that it was a bad trade no matter what. One is that they had Varsho batting cleanup early in the season. Two is that part of the appeal of Dalton Varsho when he came over was that he had caught 30 games in the big leagues and that would allow Alejandro Kirk to DH more, because then they wouldn't have to worry about an injury to Danny Jansen as the catcher, because Varsho could come in and catch. Varsho didn't catch one game. So part of the appeal of the trade was disappearing because he didn't catch, and the other was they miscalculated how polished a hitter he was by having him bat so high in the order for the first 3 quarters of the season.
Right, and even simpletons with metrics like me could have told you that. I mean, his 2022 season with Arizona, he couldn't hit lefties a lick, like literally couldn't hit lefties a lick, and his 800 OPS against right-handed hitters was heavily skewed to the slug. Like it was almost 500 slug, and the OBP was like 315, 317, something like that. So it's like he wasn't on base a lot against either side.
That reminds me, one more question before we move on. If you're a curmudgeon, what the hell am I? I'm 25 years older than you. So is there a degree of curmudgeonry that maybe I'm not seeing?
I'm gonna have to think on that, Griff. I'm gonna have to think on that.
Or maybe you're just a curmudgeon before your time.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's start waking up in the morning. My back hurts. My knees hurt. Get off my lawn. Of course, I'd have to have a lawn to be able to yell that.
Nova Scotia is your lawn.
I can scream at the clouds, though. Old man yelling at clouds. Here's another one. So the 5 years to judge a trade is a fair comment, but also leaves room to exit out the back. Here's another one. There were a few I can't honestly answer that. And that had a lot to do with questions about communication and, how game preparation and strategy gets passed down, manager, coaching staff, players, clubhouse, all of it. And I have to wait for the reports to come in. I'm going to pour over documents.
Yeah. In terms of how to improve, I think the hitting was a big part of that question. I'm going to have
that was part of it.
To come in. When in fact, Luis Rivera is already retired. We know that Don Mattingly is likely to be interviewed for managerial openings at this point and may not be back. I mean, I can't see him not getting a managerial job with the number that are open and him wanting a job. I mean, if he's waiting for the Yankees job for Aaron Boone to step aside or be fired, then he may come back here. But the hitting has to be addressed. The hitting coach, like next level, you go, who's to blame? You go, Edward Rogers, no, let's go next level. Mark Shapiro, no, let's go next level. Ross Atkins, no, let's go next level. John Schneider, no. Well, the next level is the coaching staff, and I believe that the buck stops there.
So to get back, though, to the I can't honestly answer that, he's talking again about questions he knows won't be followed up on with him. So he is correct in saying I can't answer A, B, C, D, or E, whatever's being asked of him in that moment, because it's only been a week or a little more than a week since the season ended, and there's a lot of due diligence and post-mortem that needs to be done. He's honest about that. I take him at his word, but it also leaves the back door to slide out of, because he knows he's not going to be back up at that podium at any point, Griff. It's going to be Ross Atkins, and it's not necessarily going to be Atkins at the podium. And the offseason gets really busy with player acquisition. Other guys move on, trades, free agency, whatever may come. And a lot of this that's on our mind now may get lost in the wash. So the questions we have today, while they're top of mind and while they're the topic du jour, may not be the questions people have in a month, in 6 weeks, in 3 months from now, when a big free agent is signed or a big trade is made, blah, 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 blah. So I'm here answering for this, but I don't really have any answers. And the part I'm not going to say out loud is hopefully these questions really don't come up again.
Yeah, I just think back while you're talking there, I was just thinking back to Ross's press conference, and he goes, I wish you would ask John Schneider this. And then after, in the time since then, we have asked the PR department if John Schneider was going to be available on a Zoom call, and the answer was no. So, like, the suggestion is that you talk to John Schneider, and the availability is none. So it's
right, because we know the line was BS to begin with.
Well, I think he was just throwing. I don't think he meant to say that. It just came out because he was trying to sort of escape from the culpability.
Well, that I love that word all of a sudden. Well, that plus, well, John Schneider, as I'd love you to ask John Schneider that question and have him tell you that he feels the freedom to make decisions, no pressure from the front office. And I'm like, if John Schneider doesn't feel that, he's not going to say that for that very reason. You know, behind closed doors, you make it clear there's a way. And then out here publicly, you're saying, well, no, he's free to make decisions. It doesn't work like that. He's not going to cross his boss publicly. Good Lord, man. We're all smarter than this, I hope.
Well,
and then,
yeah.
Do you want to?
No, I'll add after you're done.
The other part is the disarmament, which I guess it's all disarming, but you know, he kind of throws in a comment about conjecture, and there's a lot of conjecture, just like there's always conjecture about my job. It's almost a psychological ploy, like, you know, geez, yeah, I do think that this guy should probably move on from this gig or be shown the door, but maybe there's something wrong with me for engaging in this conjecture and just bringing it up all the time. I mean, yeah, it's been 8 years. It's been the better part of a decade. Most front offices don't get this amount of time with these results, but I am the crazy one for conjecturing. And we don't like to lay blame. I want people to have the freedom to make mistakes. I'm not looking around for somebody to blame here. The psychological game is unspoken, of course. You people are looking for somebody to blame. We're good human beings who do things the right way in our culture, and we're not looking to blame. Only people who don't have anything better to do with their time look to blame people. We've got a culture of freedom here. We can make decisions, and when things don't go right, we're not pointing fingers. It's kumbaya. And it again, the psychological ploy is if you're looking to blame anybody, there's something wrong with you for wanting to blame. And what it does subconsciously is it makes people who want the team they cheer for to hold people accountable, it makes them almost feel guilty for wanting some level of accountability. It's not a compliment and it's not a criticism, Griff, but it is shrewd PR from a guy who is polished at this, who's been doing this for the better part of 30 years when you combine Cleveland and Toronto, but who also acknowledged that after almost 3 decades in the game, he's still struggling to figure out how communication is supposed to work within his own organization.
To me, one of the important aspects of Shapiro's appearance at the mic was his use of semantics, or his ability to listen to what Ross Atkins said and to explain to the point, because I was reluctant last week to call Ross Atkins a liar on several occasions that he spoke about the Barrios move. The social media was calling him a liar. People in the media were calling him a liar. But I've been there. I've been behind those scenes, and I understand about how can I say this and not be lying. And to me, there were 2 things that Ross said that Mark Shapiro cleared up. The first is, I don't attend the morning meetings. I don't go to those meetings where the strategy is discussed. So semantically, he's correct. He was not at the meetings, but he knew about it from the evening before, or even earlier the morning of that game 2. He knew that move was going to be made. The other semantics driven / maybe it was a lie, maybe it was misleading, was to say that when Yusei Kikuchi got to warm up in the bullpen and came in, I saw it at the same time as you did, and it surprised me. Now, the semantics that was cleared up by Mark Shapiro was that they knew it would happen. They knew it was after the 3rd hitter, but they didn't know whether it was the first time through or the second time through the order. And it was the first time through. So semantically, Ross Atkins was as surprised or was seeing it for the first time as everyone else was, when in fact he knew that move was going to happen, that as soon as Max Kepler was coming up the second or third time, that he was going to bring in Kikuchi and show the Twins and the world how smart the Blue Jays were. And it didn't work out.
And if it was the 3rd time through the order, I even if Barrios was shoving like he was up to that point, people would be upset. But even if he'd started to regress a bit, or maybe started to get into some trouble where you got a base runner or 2 on, whatever, you're maybe losing a bit off your stuff, that might not be noticeable to the untrained eye. It's very typical in this day and age to go to a reliever 3rd time through the order. I don't think there would be anywhere near the outburst over that issue.
No, if it was 3rd time through the order, say with 2 out in the 6th or sometime in the 6th inning, normal. The other part of that is that they would have gone to Genesis Cabrera because you don't need Kikuchi's 3 innings or his ability to pitch 3 innings. And you could save Kikuchi for the next day for Chris Bassett, who would be in the same position. He'd have the same lineup to face. It would be another must-win game or go home. It would have been the same situation, except that the Blue Jays took a guy out who was just dealing. It was his game. Jose Barrios wanted that game. His family and friends were in the stands. He knew that the plan was to bring Kikuchi in at some point, but again, he didn't know it was going to be after 12 hitters when he was at his very best. And so I think that that's driven a wedge into the relationship between front office and the clubhouse that will extend into spring training of 2024.
So expand on this, Griff, because I think this is far more important than how anybody feels in that front office about you or about me or about any member of the media or Joe or Jill Q fan. I mean, there are dissenters in the fan base. There are people who are for these guys in the fan base. I do think it's interesting that sometimes we get so entrenched in the analytics debate that there's almost this perception that anybody who doesn't like Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins also hates analytics, and anybody, who doesn't have much time for Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins are just knuckle dragging old school people who want base stealers leading off and people who bunt them over batting second. That's just all crap. It's got nothing to do with analytics or anything else. My issue has been personality, intent sometimes, and varying degrees of fiddling with the truth. You say what you want to me, whether I buy it or not is up to me. But the relationship between front office and clubhouse is a serious issue. And for a team president who's been in baseball for 30 years and has worked high level in front offices for that long, for that to be an issue on his watch this deep into his career has got to be worrying to him. It's got to be bothersome. It shouldn't be happening.
I'll keep it simple. I've been with and around both Canadian teams, the Expos, obviously, and the Blue Jays. And there's always been a mentality that New York, Major League Baseball, and the world are against the two Canadian teams. I remember Dan Schulman telling me when he was at ESPN that he argued that the Blue Jays were a good team this coming season. We need to have them on Sunday Night Baseball. And they said, no, we're not having them. Nobody cares. And so using that mentality or that perception, it's always been an us against the world mentality inside that clubhouse. And for many years in Montreal and Toronto, us included the front office, us included the GM, us included the fans. But after the Barrios thing and where they say now they got to have more communication with players, us is the players in the clubhouse and them is the rest of baseball. And then on the outside, trying to help the us is the front office, but they will never be, again, as far as I'm concerned, this group will not be included in the us that has been forever in with Canadian baseball teams.
But the body of work is undeniable, Griff. Like that, see, this is the most, like, I'm kind of pissed off at myself that it took me 50 minutes into this podcast to just say what I've always felt. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm giving myself a full temple massage here at this point. Can Mark Shapiro sit there and honestly believe that Ross Atkins is the best person for Ross Atkins' job? I don't need to hear about friendships. I don't need to hear about personal relationships. I don't need to hear about that stuff. I want, and I understand human beings don't work this way. I certainly don't. So I get it when I say this and ask this. But can somebody honestly tell me, Mark Shapiro, Joe or Jill Q fan, that Ross Atkins, with all that we know, is the best person to be the general manager of the Toronto Blue Jays? And if you can say yes to that, I am all ears for as long as I need you to defend your thesis. Because there are people unemployed right now who I would argue are better.
Well, I would suggest that there are a lot of people around baseball and in the Blue Jays nation that think that Mark Shapiro runs the baseball operation, the roster, the decisions, and they would be wrong because he has final say. He hears about it before the trigger is pulled on any deal, any free agent signing, because he has to go and get it cleared with ownership. But he leaves it to Ross Atkins to initiate the conversations, to follow up with agents, to follow up with other GMs. So basically, I'm agreeing with you. I think that if the ultimate decision was Mark Shapiro's, if he was still running baseball personnel, baseball operations, that would be fine to have Ross Atkins, because all he's doing is being your puppet in those situations. But he's not. His decisions, his initiations of trades and free agent negotiations are his. And therefore, I would suggest that, yeah, there are other people who could do that job better.
So, but again, the buck stops at the top, as it should. And Mark has decided that Ross Atkins deserves another kick at this can and is the best, and therefore is the best person for this job. And I have to say, Griff, that this organization, and I do think it would be different. I'm not saying it would be better or worse, because I haven't thought about it that much, but I do think it would be different if these people were reporting to an individual, were reporting to an owner, who is an actual human being.
Well, that hasn't happened in a while. I mean, the family ownership and
Right.
the disappearance of family ownership and individual ownership is why Charles Bronfman sold the Montreal Expos to a group that ran it in 15 years, ran it out of town. But he was loving that partnership with other families and individuals, and it started to deteriorate and it started to disappear. So I don't think that the Blue Jays are the Lone Rangers in this regard.
No, and there's no question. And I do think of other sports when I say something like that, right? Like the National Football League requires individual ownership. Now, a lot of these business people made the Walmart people own the Denver Broncos. Jerry Jones is a billionaire oil tycoon. That's how he made his money originally. Like, I get all that. And when I also say it, I understand, or when I say it, I also understand that, you know, for every good owner you have a Eugene Melnick, right? You have a crazy person who meddles and makes things worse and all of it. So but all I'm saying is that if there was a person to whom Mark Shapiro had to answer for all of this, a single individual with the power to pull the trigger, I think some more direct questions and some more clearer answers would A, get asked, and B, be required. I'm not saying for better or worse. I'm just saying the structure.
Yeah, that's a pipe dream, not going to happen.
Is the way that it goes now. So that's that. I mean, I almost need to unhook the needle from my arm here, Griff, because I think next week we're not going to have a press conference to break down. It's on to year 9. It's on to year 9. We're just going on to year 9. So everybody, I'm just going to cover my eyes and onward we go. And everything's great. The clubhouse is happy. Everybody's good. You know, Chaim Bloom's out of a job after 4 years, after essentially being told, we're not paying Mookie Betts that. You got to trade him.
Kim Ng is out of a job.
Yeah, Kim Ng.
I mean, the pioneer for women in sports and the first woman general manager in baseball, signed up with the Marlins how many years ago? 2?
I think she was GM for 3 years. So that happened under Jeter, obviously.
And then had a mutual option, and just Monday morning decided that her half of the mutual option would be turned down. The club had already said, we want you back. So that's a story that will be unfolding, and we'll figure out by following along, and maybe we can talk about that next week.
Yeah, in a span of 12 months, Derek Jeter said bye-bye. And Kim Ng said bye-bye. And I hope she,
and they made,
I know she's going to land somewhere, but I hope it remains in a role of prominence. And she's a good baseball person, and had that Marlins team on the right track in spite of what was going on around her at times. She had grown that Marlins team into a contender. That's what they are right now, a contender in the National League. The championship series as we sit here, Griff. So
before we get championships, what about another move in pioneering women? When the Giants interviewed Alyssa Nakin she was coaching with them, but for the open managerial position. Now my thought on that is that it's nice. It's a good move for women in professional sports in baseball, but it means nothing. It's symbolic because if a man with her qualifications was interviewed for that job, it wouldn't be considered. So it's nice that she got a foot in the door and was interviewed. But to me, she needs to go to the minor leagues. Her background is in softball and coaching a year at with the Giants. But if she really wants to aspire to be a major league manager, she has to go to the minor leagues, manage somewhere down there, be successful, and move on up the ladder.
Fair comments all around, but I do think it's important that these interviews are even happening.
Oh, absolutely.
And we know that progress often occurs with a trickle as opposed to the tap just turning on and the water coming rushing out. So the fact that this is happening, good for the San Francisco Giants. Let's hope it's not tokenism that this happened. And if it doesn't happen again for anybody for 10 years, that will be worrisome and bothersome and disconcerting. But in and of itself, standing alone right now, an important step forward, and let's see more of that.
And hopefully Kim Ng continues that progress and lands in a significant role still in baseball.
Yeah, and by the way, Kim Ng, like, she's in her mid-50s. She's got a long history in front offices and has worked for Major League Baseball. Like, she's decades into this now. Her qualifications are clear, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking about 29 or 30 other teams' general managers and their qualifications. You know, I don't feel like Kim Ng needs to stand with a whiteboard on the side of a street and say, here's what I've done. I mean, she is full value and will be of great value to whatever team hires her next. And hopefully it's in a front-facing, roster-building at the major league level role. The championship series, Griff. So we tweeted these predictions in advance. So as we sit here on Monday, October the 16th, game one of the ALCS has happened. Lock it down, Aroldis Chapman. Like, you just absolute. I mean, you know when he comes in, Griff, the game's over, right? Like, you just know he's got it. By the way, I do want to say Jordan Montgomery. I mean,
couldn't make the Yankees rotation.
Couldn't make, yeah, and it went sideways with the Cardinals and what was a bad year for St. Louis. Ends up in Texas, pitches really well for them down the stretch. They're Scherzerless and John Grayless in the early part of the playoffs, at least. And there's Jordan Montgomery. Of course, Jacob deGrom went down in May or whenever it was. Like, there's Jordan Montgomery stepping up and being a postseason ace for this team when they needed it the most. So they get a game one win in Houston, 2-0 last night. We can talk about Altuve's base running if you want, but I picked Houston in 6 before this series started, and I'm starting to feel like the Texas Rangers, Griff, are going to make a fool out of me yet again because they took down my trash birds in the previous series, and I don't even think I took Texas to beat Tampa Bay. Meanwhile, the Rangers won't lose a game.
Yeah, I'm 5-3 in the 8 series so far. I think you're maybe the same or 4-4.
Well, I'm worse than you because, I might have one-upped you in the early.
Yeah, I think wild series 5-3, but not always the identical.
But team. you one-upped me. You one-upped me because you got Texas over Baltimore, and we agreed on the other 3 series in the DS.
So I tweeted before Sunday night's game, Texas, and I will take Texas in 5. And the other series, I wouldn't have taken them in 5 if Matt Bush, that asshole, was still on the pitching staff, but he was left off to get Max Scherzer on and John Gray. So I felt free to take the Rangers because, you know, Matt Bush is still around. He lost that last game of the division series in 2016. He was a losing pitcher to a Roberto Osuna. There's a couple of fine young men.
Yeah, a couple of heroes.
Yeah.
Isn't like Matt Bush? He's like my age. Well, maybe not quite. I'm 44.
Yeah, but like 4 of those years were in prison, and that keeps you young.
Yeah. Yeah. That keeps you that gruel that they feed you keeps you young.
What about the other series?
I will.
Diamondbacks, Phillies. What'd you say?
No, I don't want to paraphrase this. I want to get it exactly as I tweeted it. So I'm pulling up the tweet. I said NLCS, a Phillies sweep feels too bold, and Phillies in 6 feels too safe. So I'll go with Phillies in 5.
And I'll take Phillies in 5. I'll take Phillies in 6 because as a member of the media who covered a lot of playoff series, 39 World Series in a row, and all the prior championship series and whatever, I would suggest that when it gets to game 5, everybody will be going, please wrap it up. And something will happen to carry it back to the other city, and it'll be 6. So I'm taking it in 6.
Another cross-country flight. I mean, so Rob Thompson, good Canadian, went to the Phillies with Joe Girardi, had been a longtime member of Girardi's coaching staff with the Yankees, and is now skipping that team and doing an awesome job. So it's good to see Rob Thompson have the success he had last year, follow it up this year with what I think we would both argue, Griff, is a better team. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Easy for me to say. I mean, there's only 4 teams left, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Philadelphia Phillies win the World Series.
Yeah,
at all.
I would. Another reason I didn't take the Astros is because it would have been a repeat of the World Series from a year ago. And the last time that happened, I think, was 77, 78 with the Yankees and Dodgers. That's a long time. If one of those two teams isn't going to get back there, I would suggest that it's the Astros because I feel strongly about the Phillies being there.
And the other one, Torey Lovullo, I'm big on story arcs with people. And Torey Lovullo got to Arizona. They were a pretty good team. They were a wild card team. They made the playoffs. Then they went into a huge valley, Griff. They had a 100-plus loss season. And you know what? Torey Lovullo didn't get fired. And he sees it through. They're on the way back up. They've got a really fun young core. Yeah, we talked about Gabby Moreno, but Corbin Carroll, I think, is going to be the runaway National League Rookie of the Year. That's a fun. Definitely. They got Gallen. They got some really good starting pitching as well. We don't know a lot about them just because they're out in Phoenix and the Blue Jays don't play them all that much, but that's a really good, young, fun team. And I like the Lovullo stories. And I like the Brandon Hyde stories where you get hired at the nadir of the organization. Yeah. And then you actually are able to see it through to the success. You're not the Dale Swaim of the 2012-13 Chicago Cubs, or dare I even say the Charlie Montoyo of the Blue Jays. You get to see it through. And the Brandon Hydes of the world and Torey Lovullo, who's been up, then down, and back up, are 2 examples of people in that.
Another reason I didn't take the Diamondbacks is that they have Gallen and Merrill Kelly as their top 2 starters. And in 2001, when they won the World Series, they had Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling. So I don't think this duo matches up with that duo. And I think that was the difference in me not choosing them, because how are you going to match up with that?
So you're just going to forever hold the Diamondbacks to the big unit Curt Schilling before he turned into a irascible lunatic.
He might have been that before. We don't know.
He might have been that before.
I'm going to hold that against them. And they will never win a World. It's like the curse of the Bambino, the curse of the big unit. You can't match up to the big unit, so you will never win.
You didn't let Randy Johnson pitch into his late 50s, and so he has cursed you.
Did the Expos ever win after the big unit left? Oh, no, Washington did, though. Yeah.
Washington.
There was no curse of the unit.
No curse of the unit. No curse of the big unit.
Anyway, it feels like we're getting close to the end here.
Yeah. We're just going to leave that hanging out there. So I feel like we covered it, Griff, and we're going to stay with you on our weekly schedule here for the foreseeable future. As we discussed last week, there might be a bit of a break as we get close to holiday time in December and in the early days of January when baseball goes quiet. But the playoffs are ongoing. The World Series will be decided within days after the World Series. We'll get to free agency. There will be the GM's meetings. A month after that, the owners' meetings. There will be transactions. There will be comings and goings, and we'll stay on top of that here on Exit Philosophy.
Yeah, I think we'll clearly carry it through the winter meetings in second week of December, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
You can get Griff's work at griffsthepitch.com, full catalog of columns, which he writes multiple times weekly. The Exit Philosophy podcast is also linked at griffsthepitch.com, and you can go through the archives for some of the great conversations one-on-one Griff has had with former Montreal Expos greats and some former and current Blue Jays. Again, griffsthepitch.com. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts, we want to let you know that youtube.com/Exit Philosophy is where you can see us. You'll get full podcast episodes there. Griff and I even did a post-game live on YouTube after the Blue Jays lost game 2 of their playoff series to the Minnesota Twins, and we're planning to do more of those, roll more of those out next season. So get to youtube.com/Exit Philosophy and subscribe, and we certainly would appreciate a subscription if you're listening and a rating. And please give us the best rating possible. Give us the full 5 stars. Give us 6. Give us 6.
Semantically.
Yeah, semantically speaking. I don't want to throw any more conjecture out there. I mean, God knows that happens enough.
No, if we fail to get a good rating, the culpability belongs to Scotty Mac.
Yes. And I will be more than happy to wear that. Have yourselves a wonderful week ahead. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next Monday.
Thanks all. Thanks, Scotty.